Hi, Gregg Perry, the historic preservationist. Welcome all from Preservation Delaware, your annual 2022 conference. Welcome to the oldest Colonial Tavern in the state of New Jersey, just across the river from you. So thanks everybody for coming here. We're at would have been the front door for this oldest tavern in New Jersey. This is the sign of the Key Tavern. Still having a replica of the sign made for this. But with this, you can see this lovely front door in the Dutch style, peen nails, handmade nails, all emulating around a center diamond. We're going to talk a little bit more when we get inside about how this dwelling got here, but this is a very prized front door, original front door from 1669. So thanks everyone for coming, and let's learn about this old Colonial Tavern. Well, hi, welcome to the Shivers House Museum here in historic Woodstown, New Jersey. Let me start back in the beginning of how this started. I'm a horologist, an antiquarian horologist, a furniture maker of almost 40 years, and an architectural preservationist, for about 25 years. So I'm a collector. Not all people that are in my realm collect, but I collect clocks and I love English furniture. So I think, about 8 years ago, I was searching for a place that would show off my collection, and I could have fun and sit at night and turn the candles on and just get a feeling of the ambiance that was once in a particular dwelling. So I stumbled across this place. It was derelict as far as I was concerned. Very, very bad condition, but it had original good bones, good structure. The worst thing that happened here, we had some sheetrock that had been put over top of some windows and some things like that. Later found out there was millwork removed and things of that nature, but the basic bones gave me a good structure. A little bit more about me, because we're going to be talking about a little bit about furniture tonight, just touching, but basically this is about the oldest tavern in the state of New Jersey, Colonial Tavern, 1669, the sign of the Key. I knew nothing about this when I purchased the dwelling. So from the photograph of this house, when you see it in the beginning of our dissertation, the south end, which would be the left side of the house, it's divided into thirds, 1669, 1723, 1813. So this is the grand reception room, and sitting in the middle section of the house, the first section that was built. So here I am looking for a place for furniture. So I find this house. I know nothing about it. Seems to have good old bones, has a good feel. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for something with the shoulders a little keeled over, something that would, do justice equally back and forth, the furniture for it and it for the furniture. And I'm an antiquarian horologist, so I have to work for a living. I do restoration of furniture, and so it's not easy. In the offing, what I wanted to do was find some people, or at least experiment finding some people, or craftsmen, or artists, or preservationists that knew what they were doing. And I looked and looked and looked in this tri-state area, and there's just a few out there, and very disappointed of the lack of in-depth quality. You find some people with some pretty good hands, but they don't have historical background. They don't know what this certain type of house. This is a Georgian style house, Georgian wood timber frame house, and that's an issue. So in the end, to make a long story short, I kind of gave up on the issue of having someone else do it. And I have the Dr. Sage Franklin here, but so I gave up on that. And about 20 years ago, when I was doing an apprenticeship at the British Horological Institute in the Midlands in the UK, I signed up for a year program that taught me the aspects of historic preservation from the hardcore colonial trades, as it would, plus a more updated segment. We have our main house cat here. He's really speaking tonight. But so I wanted to be certified, and I got myself into a program of grade 2, and it's called grade 2 star historic preservation. And that means anything from Westminster Abbey to other important buildings, manor houses and castles throughout England. And these, anything from damp to stone conservation, restoration, brick, window rebuilding, moldings, timber framing, damp, everything included. How to make bricks, how to slake lime mortar, everything you need to know. So it's a year program that I went through, and I'm certified in the UK, grade 2 and grade 2 star. And I did it for fun, essentially, when I was over there, when I was living over in England for a few years. I never thought that I'd use it. So I thought, okay, I do have this information, I do have this background, this is a great time to get this thing in gear. So I embarked on this myself, and how I would handle this, I'd work extra hard, 8 months of the year, and I basically would take 3 to 4 months in the warm summer months to do the restoration. So it took about 5 years. The project is not complete. I did it a little bit differently than some people might do. I started from the foundation, repointing and replacing brick. I actually made bricks, did molds of existing style and shape of bricks, and I cast bricks and fired them using lime mortar. And I went around the entire house, took all the clapboard off. I found a lot of secrets in the house, but we're here talking about the Colonial Tavern today. Actually rebuilt and restored some 22 pair of double hung sash. So it was hands-on, it was a great experience, and in doing so, I've been a consultant for other historic dwellings in the tri-state area, approximately about 25, since I began this endeavor. So let's talk about how this dwelling got to be here. Around 1650, a fellow named John Shivers, who was living in Monkstown, which is in Dublin, Ireland, or just outside of Dublin, was sent over by the king. And sent over by the king, he was given land to come here and to colonize, which was considered West Jersey. This is southern New Jersey, called West Jersey back then. So he was sent here, he was given land. He was given 5,000 acres for his reward, and 55,000 acres to sell. And we have a lot of little hamlets here that started out in the early 18th century, and particularly the late 17th century with John Shivers. And it could be Carney's Point and these kind of places, Pennsville, Penns Grove. So John Shivers was instrumental in if not selling directly to, but getting the ball rolling. He was somewhat of a real estate mogul. So how does he do this? This is no man's land. A squirrel could go from Maine to Florida through this quote town here and never touch the ground. That's how deeply forested it was. So Shivers, because the king was going to utilize what is now Salem, New Jersey, and called the Royal Port. So that was the Royal Port, and you would have had what became known as King's Highway, the first King's Highway coming out of Salem, and to put the first tavern in the state of New Jersey going north. And about 8 miles, a horse becomes tired, you got to change horses, or you stop for the night at a tavern. And that's what they've been doing in England for all these years. So John Shivers, with the help, with creating a relationship with the Native Americans, they first built a sawmill in a small lake in this town before it was called Woodstown, and a woodard power sawmill, and they actually built a timber frame structure 8 miles from Salem. And he called it Sign of the Key Tavern. Fascinated by keys, fascinated by horology and clocks back in Dublin, Ireland. And he actually came over with some clocks when he came. But nevertheless, Shivers opens a tavern. And we're not going to talk about what taverns really mean and represent. I mean, they're gathering places, they're public houses, a place you can go for a quick beverage, cider, ale. You can't drink any of the water here. Even the babies were drinking cider, hard cider and ale, because everyone would have gotten sick. one meal served in the day. And this house actually contains the oldest drive-up window, curbside service. And we'll go over that a little bit later. But so Shivers builds a tavern. It can house approximately 6 to 8 people upstairs. So you can either spend the night, get refueled. It was a place for the armies. It could have been for the colonists, for the king's men. Whoever was in charge in a certain area could have used this. You could have had church services. You eventually could have got your mail here in the oldest in these old taverns, 17th century taverns. So what did John Shivers do? He started selling land, and he created a place for people to stop, and people coming over on board through Salem. And he'd say, hey, I got some land for sale. You know, you want to look at this? And he explains the area, has maps and things like that. So he continued doing this. He had his son Samuel Shivers and another son, but Samuel Shivers was the one that tended to be drawn toward the tavern. He was interested in dry goods and importation of wines and things like that, and finer things from the UK and from Europe in general to bring to it as he became a teenage boy, and he helped his father extensively. So what happened? We get into to turn into this 1700, and Samuel Shivers, the son, comes on the spot that I'm sitting now and builds the house. This was the grand reception room. He builds just the center part of this house that you saw in that first photograph, and it actually started to replace a cabin that John Shivers, the father, put here in around 1655. And so Samuel Shivers puts a house here. Simultaneously, he has a couple kids. He's married, has a couple children, and the father passes away. John Shivers passes away. So Samuel Shivers has to make the decision: do I want to maintain this tavern life, or do I want to do what? So he was going to sell the land, the acreage that the tavern was on. So he needs more space. He's got 2 children. This room I'm sitting in is as wide as his house was. So it's a grand reception room, it's a keeping room behind me, and it's basically 2 small rooms upstairs, a summer kitchen behind where the original cabin was of John Shivers. So he tends to sell it. What does he do? He goes to 3 Native Americans, and he tells them to disassemble it. He barters with them, gives them a little bit of money and some English goods. So they disassemble, they label the tavern, timber frame construction, and with 3 oxen and a wood sled, they drag it 1.8 miles to this present location. And what they do, to my right, is where they resurrected this tavern from 1669. So they resurrected it there. It took about 2 weeks total. They disassembled the massive fireplace, and when they got here, they made new bricks. They fired new bricks, and this went on for a couple weeks, a month or so, and they built a big hearth downstairs, and they continued to use it as a dry goods store on the downstairs portion. But what they did when they added, and it was almost symmetrical, almost the same size, because they were dealing with great proportions back then. So they added it to the center section of the house, built in 1723. They bring on the 1669 section, added on, but they put the front of the tavern toward the back of the house. So the front door you saw me coming in initially, that was the front of the tavern. But remember, there were no windows in the back of the tavern because alcohol was such a hot commodity. It was the drug of the day. Anybody would have fought, killed, done anything they could to have some alcohol. So the back of the tavern is on the front of this house, and they added windows upstairs, downstairs. It's 2 bays wide, it's 2 stories high. And so now he's basically doubled his house for almost little to no money. He ends up selling the land, and the actual initial tavern, the oldest tavern, was at where routes 40 and 45. That's where John Shivers built it. And kind of the going joke or the talk in town here is, today in 2022, there is a tavern called the Corner Bar there. It's kind of a dive bar. Sorry guys, anyone out there, but it's somewhat of a biker bar, all seasoned, things like that. And it's a traveling bar. People on Route 40, they stop. But this was the first corner bar. That's kind of what we talk about. The sign of the key was the first corner bar. So that's how the oldest tavern got here. So the drive-up window was soon clapboarded over, and we had various owners over the years in the next 100 years. So things do get changed a bit. I'm going to dwell a little bit here on the Shivers House Museum, we're a museum that's only open. We have all the certifications, the 4 major certifications needed for a really spectacular dwelling. I'm not going to go into the interior here. You can see a little bit of the ambiance here. We're not burning real fireplace. We are a museum, so we are very conscious of fire. The final third of the house was added in 1813 by the Shins, another big name in Woodstown. We're going to put a few things out there. Some of the most important things that occurred in this room or this house. A great thing was about 3 years ago, I was contacted by very distant relatives of the Shivers that go back to 1650 when John Shivers arrived. Diaries and inventories from the very first day of the tavern. 12 diaries and a whole series of inventories that goes up through the mid-18th century. Still has to be conserved, still has to be deciphered. Old English is difficult, the pages are crumbling, etc., etc. So what it's enabled me to do as a collector, as a builder, as a scholar historian, is to understand in this room the day that this building or this center portion of the house was made, what was in this house. So where was it? 2 chairs in front of the fireplace, 4 tall case clocks, sofa, tea table, foot warmer. What was in this house? So I know if I go to a particular diary, I've chosen to do the 1770s. It's a great high point because it really showcases some of the high style Georgian furniture that I prefer and that I have. And if I didn't have it in my collection, I went out and sought it at auction, a particular piece or ornament to put somewhere. But over the fireplace, we have John Shivers, a portrait of John Shivers, and that came from an extended family member also. So some wonderful stuff. So even the first day the old Colonial Tavern opened, I know what was in there. How much flour, how much sugar, what they were making, how many people came through the door. 3 people came through the door that day. So it was not a very upscale day because you're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. But I want to make just the Shivers House Museum here, the entire encompassment of it has some very important things going. With those diaries I just referred to, and it can be plainly seen in 2 locations or 2 times. In the middle of the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin found his way here. Franklin came here because Franklin was living in Philadelphia, and Franklin was building the glass harmonica. And he went back and forth with Caspar Wister of Allowaystown, about 6 miles south of here, where the first glass making in America started. So Franklin was a friend, a mutual friend or acquaintance of Shivers, Samuel Shivers of the house here, and he had also heard. So they had a meeting here. They had a colloquy here of sorts. So Franklin came here, met Caspar Wister. They talked about scientific glass, making it Allowaystown for his glass harmonica. He knew Samuel Shivers, who started selling some additional lands and things of that nature. And then he actually made a suggestion that, when you really make it in Allowaystown, being the first glass manufacturer, you should be living in Philadelphia. So there was a house just a few houses down from where Benjamin Franklin lived that Caspar Wister actually went to buy. So on 2 occasions he was here. The governor of New Jersey, William Franklin, Benjamin Franklin's son, was here on multiple occasions buying land. He was a land mogul, even though he didn't see eye to eye with his father, and he was never here when his father was here. So that's old history, and it's great history. It's great history for this house. And seemingly no one knows any of this stuff about this, and that's what makes it just a great deal of interest and a great deal of fun to unearth things as you turn each page. And but we have some new history also before we get really encompassing into some depth into the tavern. The new history is 1917, and the interesting thing here, the first silent film was from MGM, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, was shot here in historic Woodstown, New Jersey in 1917. So we have old history going back, to when the tavern was moved here in 1626 or 1726, and we have more modern type history. But we have Everett Shinn, who was in high school in the late 19th century, and he was a great artist at Woodstown High School, and he found himself as a great painter, and he moved on to New York, and he eventually, we're going to skip all the details, but he eventually met up with the founders of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Samuel Goldwyn, in New York City, as he was displaying his paintings one day, and they developed a very intimate long-term relationship. And Samuel Goldwyn was lamenting many times over 3 years to Everett Shinn that that MGM is in deep trouble, because MGM is in trouble because the French are dominating the world 20 years ahead. The French are starting talkies, and the Americans, MGM, has not even started silent films. So they lamented. They had a great, close, intimate relationship, and Everett Shinn convinced Samuel Goldwyn, I will write the film, and you provide the funds, get the videographers, get the equipment and everything we need here, and let's do a film. So hence, it was called Polly of the Circus. March 1917, the film debuted, the first silent film of MGM. Prior to that, they were only doing vaudeville. And so it was a great success. All the interior scenes were shot in this house, this Samuel Shivers house. So we have a lot of great early. So the first MGM film was shot here. How phenomenal is that? So, so a lot of things here in Woodstown. So what we're going to do is, for maybe another time period, we can talk about the balance of the house. There's rooms upstairs. There's a lot of phenomenal furniture here, a lot of horology to go over. We have a deep horology collection upstairs, another 100 clocks that I tend, a few times a year, we tend to move out some of the clocks, bring other clocks, and so we like to move things around a little bit. So museum goers will find different objects when they come back the next time. So that's for another time. I think we got deep enough into the Shivers House Museum per se. So now we're going to turn toward, and we're going to go into the oldest tavern in the state of New Jersey, and didn't realize this until I got here and opened up the wall and then dug deep, and again, someone gives me diaries, and I find in a couple hardback books written one in the late 19th century and two in the early 20th century, history books about what had happened with this dwelling and how the tavern came to be sitting up here at 68 North Main Street. So let's move from here and let's go into the old tavern, and let's talk about it for a bit. So welcome to New Jersey's oldest Colonial Tavern, the Sign of the Key. So we just touched and highlighted on a few items here, but this was this beautiful door we started out the conversation with. Again, a peened over nail door. It's actually kind of almost a double door, which is very interesting. Original strap hinges and pintles, phenomenal. It's great to have this here. And we have an original lock. I've rebuilt the lock, but let's talk about some things in here. Let's talk about this door with regards to preservation now. So I come here, and there's a glass door here. There's no cage bar. We're going to see it in the other room. There's no drive-up window. This wall is partial, which we're going to see. The center dividing wall from the hearth room, from the tavern room, from the cage bar room. So it was diminished greatly. So what happened? So in 1946, this house, the Shivers house, which this was part of it, had no electricity, no running water, no heating. They heated with a coal stove going into the chimney, several coal stoves. So this house was spared a lot of degradation from builders and from remodelers and things like that, but it was a rented dwelling, so it suffered a little pro and con here and there. So immediately coming in, I would say about 3 years later, I get a phone call from someone 3 years into the project. Someone says, I understand you're a historic preservationist, you're undertaking this project. My mother in 1946 purchased a cage bar, couple old doors, this being one of them, and a ton of raised paneling for the ceilings and for walls and moldings. So a person bought this, wanted to turn it into an antique shop, so she kind of gutted it in a way, and she sold off all this to a woman in Maine. The woman in Maine wants to put it into a house she's bought, but she gets ill. The son gets all this millwork, so to speak, the cage bar, the door, and he just never finds that house. And he finds himself on the other end of or he's on the other end of the phone. He's telling me he's very ill. He has cancer. He's not going to last, several months. That's what they're giving him. And he would like me to have this back, and if I would like to have it, and put it back in the house because he understands I'm doing a sympathetic restoration on this dwelling. So I said, absolutely, got a check out for a couple $1,000s, and the best couple $1,000s you ever want to spend, driving up to Maine, picking the stuff up, and bringing it back. So that's how the cage bar got here. A lot of other millwork, another part of the dwelling. We won't talk about that, but we're just going to key on here. Parts of the center wall were missing, the door, et cetera, et cetera. So this door was in a box, a crate, lead lined. It had a lot of black mold, so I've done a sympathetic restoration on it. These are wall boards that had to be cleaned. So this is called almost a wagon type wainscot. So if you would think about a wagon with horses, and they'd have sides, maybe removable sides with horizontal planks and 2 staves. So this is what it's named after. So, but here they put wood on all the walls instead of plaster. They weren't plastering this tavern. This was rough and ready back in the woods. So they're just cutting stuff at the water mill, which would become Woodstown Lake, the water sawmill, and these are the pine, the local pine they used, and the local pine on the floor too. And it all had to be refinished. It was painted. They painted this it had white paint and polka dots on it. So these are 12, 13-inch wide floorboards here. So it all had to be cleaned up and sanded heavily to get years of degradation off. But first in, so I'm going to microcosm this into the plan that I did. I started from the ground up, just using the tavern side of this dwelling, okay? So I repointed everything. I raked out all the Portland cement, for a better term, parged everything out of the foundation, and I slaked lime. I went to experience it on a very small scale of slaking. I've had to actually create bricks and bake bricks, make bricks. So that was first. And why I wanted to do that, because the front of the house was looking so bad, absolutely so bad. I wanted to give the community a good jump. Typically, somebody's going to start at the top of the roof and say, yeah, we're undercover and we're dried in. But, me being an artist, a craftsman in my own right, I don't want to blow that much money on a roof, $80,000 on a shake roof. I don't want to do it right off the bat. And it still is not done, okay? And just a quick word about the roof while we're there. The roof has an original 1710 cedar shakes on it with 2 layers of tin, and it's decaying very quickly. So within the next 4 to 5 years, there will be a hand split cedar shake roof, not machine bandsaw now, but a hand split one. So that's what we're going to do. So that's coming. That's forthcoming. But so I wanted to make a big splash, so I went all the way around this dwelling. All the clapboard comes off. What's the first thing I'm doing after the foundation? Timber framing. So I'm taking 10-foot sections off gently where the clapboard is still in good condition. I have some original clapboard on the front of this tavern, original. It comes off very slowly, gingerly. You save all the old nails. You get in the wall. There's rot in some corner posts. There's rot in some diagonals. You do all the timber framing utilizing white oak, because white oak is very resistant to rot and vermin and things like that. So I owned, at that time, part owner in a small sawmill up in Pennsylvania. I go up and cut exactly what I need, just like they did. I put these pieces in the dwelling green and let them dry on their own. So going around, putting clapboard back on, I actually milled cedar clapboard to match the original style of clapboard that was on here. It's a very interesting style here. I've seen it only one other place, and I'm sure it's all around, but there's a very nice house in Old historic Newcastle, and the street is the Strand, I believe. It's right on the water, and it has the same type. So when the clapboard boards are meeting, they're at 45-degree angles. So this one is mating up to this one at a 45 over a 45. So what it does, the great thing about that, is that when the drop of water is coming down the outside of the clapboard plank, instead of having a flat there or even a little rounded 1/4 inch area, it can kind of hang there. This is almost a pointed, not a sharp edge, but a sharp enough edge that the drop drops to the next piece of clapboard. So that's the type that's on the entire house. So I just mimicked that, I continued to mill that. And then, so I turned to the restoration of the windows. The windows, unfortunately, let's put it this way, I made new windows, new double hung sash, because somewhere around 1946, when this individual wanted to turn this lovely dwelling into an antique shop, and it was chic to go from, 12 over 12 to 6 over 6. So I recreated everything from photographs from the late 19th century, and I came back with the 12 over 12. So all handmade with hand molding planes, and then I got to the point where everything was stable on the outside and everything was tight, and I wanted to move into the tavern. So again, it would have been the front of the tavern. It would have had one window and one door in the front, because the issues were people breaking in. And then when we get into the next room, they added 2 windows down, the bay down, and 2 windows up to bring light in, but to make the outside of the house symmetrical. So that's what was going on. So then I came in and I started cleaning this. A lot of this had black mold on it. I went around and I cleaned all the walls. I had to redo the floors. I mean, it's a dirty word, but you had to do it. I mean, there was so much paint on them, you had to sand it down, but it's just, putting a wax shellac finish on there just to give it a little bit of color, and that's the kind of thing. So let's just go around the room. So this was a room in the tavern, and the only thing the tavern doesn't have today, when you come in here, there was a stairway that went upstairs. But, because of heating and various things, quote, mechanicals that the house has right now, the house museum, you can't have the stairway here. So you have to make a sacrifice. How many people, so you can go through the top of the house and get into the rooms upstairs. So the stairway is the only thing missing. But it was a very small stairway when it was here. It was only 2 feet wide. So you would come over here, and this big settee bench was moved out, and you would go up the stairway upstairs. So, but you would come in and you would have somebody tending here. It could have been a lady from the local area. It could have been Native Americans. It could have eventually been slaves here, working in the tavern. They would take your order. What do you want? Do you want to eat? Do you want to drink? They send you basically into the dining room behind. That's what, or to get a drink. Or for social functions, it would have been in that room. It's not a big room. There weren't a lot of people where this was. Or this was also a fur trading center. So Shivers was working with the Indians. They were providing furs. People came in to get furs for fur coats. People came in to sell furs. So it's a whole barter system. The thing America's taking off here in West Jersey, right outside of Woodstown, New Jersey. So that's what's happening in this room. And you would have had one person cooking over here in front of this lovely hearth. So when this was moved here in 1726, it took them another few weeks to make the bricks. They put the herringbone design in the back of the fireplace, utilizing the original full crane here that was taken from the tavern up where routes 40 and 45 are. So we're showing it here with a lot of accoutrements and bowls and various utensils, anything you can imagine. We have probably over 400 type of cast accoutrements. I change them around periodically so we can talk to different groups about them. You can see the burnt fire here from all the burnt wood, the smoke, and just singed a little bit from all the fires that have been here. This is plastered up, but take a look at these timbers up here. So this is the oldest tavern. You can tell, so anybody's in the know knows these are 4.5 inches wide, roughly by 9-inch pieces of timber. Hand hewn, they're leaving all the marks on there. Somebody at some time had painted this, and then somebody came back and stripped it. So it could have been whitewashed, we don't know. But the beautiful thing is we can see the massiveness, and it tells us exactly the period of the timbers were made. Over here we're just showing the windows. You know, I'm just showing a typical window on a bar, on a bar which I fabricated, just typical gingham. And here are the windows. Should be heavy muttons and mullions, almost 1.25 inches wide. The muttons and mullions. So just utilizing restoration glass, the heavy restoration glass, because you would have had heavy waves at that point in glass making, because the fires weren't totally perfected. This came from Casper, Worcester, and Alloway's town. And so we know what was in this tavern, kind of trying to depict this the first day it opened in 1669. This long, elongated table, kind of a trestle table that would tilt up and double as a bench, and just a mixed match of chairs. These are chairs coming out of the early 18th century, and they're all painted type chairs. And we have a cheese dryer here by the wall. You know, have holes in the bottom of that when you're making your cheese, a small settle, and a watch box from the early 18th century here. You know, it was never, everyone, maybe some of you don't know, it was very bad luck to lay your watch down. That conical watch spring that's opening and closing, if you laid it down enough on your nightstand, it eventually wouldn't run. And people got spooked. They thought that they were doing something wrong. But they found if they would hang it in something, the watch would never go out. So these became very popular. You kept the dust and dirt off of them, and plus their watches continued to work. So we have a candle dryer here, and this is a period piece from the 18th century. Nice step back hutch. And behind the hutch is a small doorway. So this is an extra thick wall here. The wall is about 30 inches, and there's a stairway that goes up to the next floor. And that would have been a stairway to get upstairs very quickly, that if there was a ruckus, there was always things happening, because people were drinking whiskey, or not whiskey, but so people were drinking ale or hard cider, so there was a lot of ruckus going on and fighting in taverns. And let's face it, this is a place where people could meet. You're in the middle of the hinterlands here, and you walk into a place that has food and you can actually talk to people. Some people have never experienced that before in their life. So how interesting is that in this tavern? I did the replastering up here. Virtually nothing had to be done here in the fireplace, and all this timber had to be replaced. It was ridden with rot and vermin, and so I had to replace all this timber, the green timber, yeah. And we have just a cupboard there. A nice support post here out of white oak. And typical, this was the amount of pewterware they had on the opening day. And showing in the corner cupboard a nice selection of tea and coffee pots. And these would have been from the 18th century. And as this was a dry goods store, this corner cupboard was moved in sometime around the 1730s. So not original to that original date, but it just houses our collection of pewter very, very nicely. So, and when John Shivers came over, he brought this over, very religious man from Salisbury Chapel. So in Salisbury Chapel, in the early, around 1640s, they went through a interior change in the church, putting new quote pews in, and they got rid of these. So John Shivers brought this over on the boat, and it's engraved in the back here. So very, very interesting stuff. And its storage, it weighs a ton. It's all out of oak. So, and you can trace these back to Salisbury, the Salisbury Chapel. So small hanging corner cover, which was there. Something similar was there, and it tells us that in the inventory on opening day, so to speak. So, but nothing like the ambiance of candlelight. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And it's nice to come here sometimes and sit and just take it in, and to wonder, the silence. We hear so much noise and pollution and visual pollution, things going on. People that drive to work to Philadelphia or Wilmington, oh my God, you can see thousands and thousands of cars. I mean, we're our minds are really meant to handle this kind of stuff. And when you hear it's silence and it's nice. It's nice. It brings you back somewhat to reality. So So I think what we're going to do is we're going to make a change, and we're going to go and we're going to head into the cage bar room, or we'll call it the dining room. Okay, so we moved over into the basically we call it the dining room or the cage bar room, and so this cage bar, in the standpoint of preservation, was taken apart in 1946, put into a lead-lined box, sold, went to Maine, put it in a damp place, was black with mold. I had to sand it and sandblast it and do all kind of crazy stuff to try and get it back. So it's back to where it's semi-respectable. And I'm sure everybody knows that the cage bar, again, was to protect the liquor, protected mail. Some people would have had some mail slots, maybe 4 or 5 in the community, but basically liquor. So when the person in charge of the bar left, that door would have come down. Okay, the wooden door had been latched and locked in the back. So the little window is the real secret here in the restoration of this tavern. That was encased in cedar clapboard, and a piece of drywall was over it on the inside. So I opened it up, did the restoration on the double hung sash, and you're looking at the oldest curbside service in the state of New Jersey in a tavern. Nothing is older than this, and we find this written in a couple books, history books, and you would come up here with your horse or in a carriage, and at that point where the tavern used to be on Route 40 and Route 45, it was actually about 2 feet lower than sitting on the foundation here, so it made it the perfect height. So the curbside service for drink opens up inside the bar, and I don't know if we notice, this wall over here, this green wall, is about 30 inches thick. And we have a stairway, the hidden stairway going up into here. If there's a ruckus upstairs, the tavern owner, the tavern keeper of that night can get up there quickly and squelch that. But this was a through door, and I tell people it reminds me of the Horn and Hardart in Philadelphia in the 40s and 50s, maybe into the 60s. So when they were cooking, the person cooking next door, she'd shove it through, and then you would have a wait person to pull it and put it on someone's table. And so how interesting is that? So a thick wall for structural purposes, also for the stairway. And all these boards had to be replaced. They were, again, a lot of deterioration. There was I'm sure a lot of water damage was what I saw that caused that deterioration. You have a little bit of storage inside the cage bar. And the cage bar was not easy to get in, this particular one, because there's a door down here. And you have to get on your hands and knees, lift the door up, and you have a huge lock here to lock it when no one's here, so no one gets in here. So usually around 9 o'clock at night, we do have a clock here. We have a single-handed clock, and remember, this is the type of thing that was in the inventory, a single-handed 8-day clock. The single hand means that no one in this time here and even over in England where this clock came from, this is an Irish clock. They had no conception of what a minute was, let alone most couldn't even tell time. They didn't even know what the Roman numerals were. They couldn't speak. They would come to a place like this to have somebody literate speak to them about what was happening with the war, what was happening with expansion from the king in this area. So here was your timekeeper, and Shivers had this almost from day one here in the tavern. He actually brought that over with him on the boat. We have another pine settle. We have an oak cabinet for pewter measures, as you can see there. And we only have 2 tables. That's all this tavern would have probably accommodated. Maybe a third table in the corner over there. But you would have had up to 4 chairs per table. 4, 8, 10 people, maybe 12 people could have dined here. And that's the extent of it. So very limited stuff. And as we talked before, these windows were put in 1946 these windows were put in 1726 when they wanted to make the front of the whole house museum, the house as we called it, symmetrical, balanced, proportionally balanced. So they put the windows in. But I have replaced these windows because, again, they were 6 over 6 in 1946 from the 12 over 12. So they're back to 12 over 12 now. And it just gives a phenomenal look. I mean, the feel of this place in the 18th century. Same thing with the flooring. Terrible shape. It was painted white, so it's undergoing restoration. So imagine the drive up window here. You may have had your own containers to be filled with ale or other things. And at the end, I actually got some wine in here just before it closed, and it had long run from 1669 almost to 1700, and that's when they closed the tavern down where it was originally located. But and again, looking at the wonderful beams up here, the 4.5 by 9 inch. So I just wonder if we have some fire buckets, because fire was always prone here. So the restoration in here, somebody probably when this place was moved here, they actually did a plaster job, and the plaster was all cracking when I came here, so I've replastered all the walls inside just this room. As we know, the other room, the actual hearth room, had like a wagon skirting around the perimeter. And this is wagon skirting here. Again, boards running horizontal around so the chairs would not beat up. This is a public place, a public house, people slamming into the wall, people having a good time sometimes or getting into brawls. So it was meant to protect the walls, wagon skirting, so to speak. So let's, we examined some things with this cage bar, and so let's take a look from another perspective. So now we got our head kitty here, Mr. Franklin, and he likes to get involved sometimes, but he's got to stay away from some of the heat, some of the candles. So what we didn't get into was standing inside the cage bar. They did have limited hours, and as I previously pointed out, this was a place for pamphlets. So you had people called pamphleteers. They'd be riders, and they'd hit all the taverns, and there would be roughly about 8 taverns to get from here to Philadelphia, or from the Royal Port in Salem. So it was quite the endeavor, and it could take a few days to get there if you're the type that chose to stay at the tavern and did not want to just trade your horse in, because you could trade your horse in, and there was a stable out behind this tavern. So you could do that and get a new horse and maybe go twice. So probably 16 miles would probably be somewhat of a limitation. But just a word about taverns. This is a full-blown tavern. This is what it was like in the 17th century. This is a 17th century tavern, meaning that there were provisions for staying. There were other types of affairs that sold liquor and maybe a quick meal, and they were called basically ale houses. They just sold, maybe just 2 types of drinks. Some houses were only open on Sunday afternoons, and these were all under very scrutinized licensing. And so who was doing the licensing of these early taverns in West Jersey? The Quakers. The Quakers that don't want to drink, say they don't drink, but yet they're the ones that are running this operation of taverns, so they're making the money off of it. So do as I say, not as I do. And that was the same what happened in taverns that were laid out in Philadelphia. When the taverns expanded into Philadelphia, the Quakers, being very astute business people, laid them strategically down near the waterfront. And they would have some taverns that the Quakers would go out and find prostitutes, have them there to service the sailors when they would come in. And then they had other ones that were basically casinos. They were gambling, playing card games for money. So the Quakers knew and strategically placed these around the city, much to the chagrin of Dr. Franklin. And he went back and forth as these taverns expanded. And but not until we probably hit the mid-18th century, or maybe the third quarter of the 18th century, did we see anything like the City Tavern in Philadelphia. That was a lush, lavish, huge place, and you would have seen several of those types in Philadelphia. And I know, but it's so sad that we lost the City Tavern. Hope someone's going to open it up, but we have a very affectionate kitty here tonight. So. But he's the head of mouse and rodent control, so he does a great job here at the tavern. Loves to see people come through, particularly at the Christmas time, and he's getting aggressive now. Okay, we're going down, buddy. So let's get back and let's talk about the upstairs of the tavern. This tavern, 2 rooms upstairs. So you have 2 accommodations. You come in, and for 2 cents, the equivalent of 2 cents today, you stay in the low end room, right up the top of the stairs. Remember, there's no heat at the top in the upstairs. And the only heat you're generating is candlelight and the heat from the fireplace, the heat from the hearth. And that would be roaring until around midnight, and they cut it off. And it didn't matter if it was 10 degrees out, you were on your own upstairs. So for that menial price, you were given a burlap type blanket, and you would sleep on the floor, and you could sleep with 6 or 7 other people on the floor. And that was it. So rough going. So the other room upstairs, directly above me here, had 2 beds in it generally, 2 large beds. And you could be in bed with 3 or 4 people. Each bed would hold 3 or 4 individuals. And people you have no idea who they are. Everybody would have slept there with their clothes on. And I'm sure the smell was good. But you're probably happy to have some friends in bed because it was pretty bloody cold here at times. So, and I'm sure in the summer it was very oppressive. It would not have been a good thing to be in the tavern. So this is a full-fledged tavern is what I'm getting at. The Indian Tavern in Haddonfield is also similar, but that again is the mid to late 18th century, and like the City Tavern. So, but these things were dotted all over the place, and people are having a hard time. The farmers may need more money, so they apply and they have to get a license from the Quakers to open up these things. So, so we're going to mention a few more things about the other parts of the dwelling. Anybody wants to come see it, and we do preservation tours here. We're doing an archaeological dig, which is ongoing for the summer kitchen, which is in the backyard, and thoughts of recreating a summer kitchen back the way it was. Possibility, maybe having small groups to come in and to lend a hand from the standpoint of just getting the feel of how do you make lime, how do you fire bricks, and how do you lay stone and foundations and timber framing. So that's a possibility of things to come. In the far end of the house, which is 1813, that 1813 portion of the house houses 2 rooms on the downstairs. The dining room, which is still under construction. The walls have been totally timber framed, re-timber framed inside. The walls have been plastered, and originally in 1813 it received some very interesting French wallpaper. We've had that reproduced, and that's going to be going up in the very near future, and that'll feature a demi-loom, but with a semi-curvature in the middle, a huge sideboard from Baltimore, middle of the 18th century, and a large grate front. A Dutch 13-light chandelier will be housed there. In addition, the second room at the far end of the house from 1813 is the music room. And when we said that I purchased back a lot of these existing structures, the cage bar and not the wagon wainscoting, no, that was made from old wood. But as we see the music room, you're going to see that there's raised panels on all 4 walls and on the ceiling. That was taken off by that 1946 individual who wanted to open this to an antique shop. And it was all taken and sold to Maine. So I did the restoration on all the paneling and put back up. And we're housing all the type of instruments that were in the inventory for in the 1770s. We have a gilt floor harp. We have a piano forte dated 1813, made in Boston. We have a series of violins and some woodwinds. So what would happen in that late 19th century here, the owner, the Shins, would actually on Sunday afternoons for 3 or 4 hours, would have a select few individuals from Woodstown come over, and they'd actually play music religiously every Sunday afternoon. So I think we're finishing up here. I hope everyone has had a good tour. I think this is a wonderful representation, whether it was the oldest tavern or not, of tavern life in the colonies. So I'd urge anyone would like to come out to please phone ahead. We require 3 to 4 week advance notice. We like to put groups through, not individuals. It's too much. It's too time consuming for us. Particularly in the holidays, we do a couple Christmas tours, and it gets a bit much. We can put 500-600 people a day through 2 consecutive days through here. So it's a real challenge. But where else can you go to see nothing but pure candlelight? So it's a real treat, and I hope everyone will come and join us sometime. And I hope everyone at Preservation Delaware has enjoyed this walk through this old tavern, and be waiting for some questions in a few minutes. Thanks everyone for listening and watching.